And where are you going? What do you want?
Hello and welcome to Business Lessons from the Military. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and we're here every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time to talk about business history and doctrine and the practices of great military leaders, and distill from them ideas that you can use in your business and professional life to make them better. So this is my way this is my way of giving back to you, my fellow citizens, for the support that you gave not just me, but all of my military colleagues during the 16 years I was on active duty and in the reserves, and all the billions of dollars that was spent on training us and engage with you on this subject and sometimes talk about a little bit of military history, or in this case, I'm going to be talking about one of the classic military texts. So a few weeks ago, I talked about Sun Tzu's Art of War, and one of the, I think, the two best known books on warfare, and the other is General Carl von Clausewitz's On War. And you can see it's actually a relatively short book, although in this case the type is pretty small, so it's a lot packed into into a short book. And for those of you who watched the show last season, and you heard me talk about Marine Corps warfighting doctrine, so I think you will find that a lot of that Marine Corps doctrine comes from von Clausewitz. And so this will be kind of a summary of a whole series of shows I did last year, but it also give you some new ideas that you can apply to your businesses. So, excuse me. I'm going to talk about this. This isn't going to cover every idea in the book. Certainly, there's way too much there. But I'm going to talk about 7, 8, maybe 9 ideas from the book, depending on how time goes, to give you an idea of the richness of the ideas in On War and how they translate virtually one-to-one into our business and professional lives. So, in no particular order of importance, frankly, one of the lessons, and I promoted this in my social media posts for the show, was the idea of the Trinity. So, of course, in Christianity, there's the Trinity: the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, or the Holy Ghost, right? And this idea of a Trinity exists in religion for millennia. In Judaism, when a man and a woman get married, that marriage is actually considered to be a Trinity because God becomes a party to that union, to that marriage as well. This kind of idea of three is there's a spiritual nature to the number 3, and that's why I think you often see the Trinity discussed in different doctrinal ideas. So Clausewitz talks about the Trinity of war as being passion, chance, and reason. So these are the 3 forces that act in warfare to determine the results, essentially. So there's passion, there's the emotions of the people, and if you're talking about a land battle, and you have one group that is highly motivated, very passionate about the battle at hand or the war at hand. Perhaps they're fighting on their homeland, and they view the war and the battle as an existential endeavor. You've got another group, maybe they're invaders, and so their families are safe across the ocean or something like that, or they're safe, back home, and they may not have as deep an emotional commitment, as deep a passion to pursuing this battle as people who are protecting their homes. The flip side, though, can be the case as well. So you can have an attacker who believes that their cause is so deeply righteous that the passion for their cause is so great that they overwhelm even a force that's defending its homes and families. So passion, the emotion of the people involved. And by the way, I'm talking about battlefield passion, but there can be passions at the command center where there's a passionate dispute between parties about what should be done. There can also be a sort of I don't want to call it a lack of passion, but an attitude of resignation. That's an emotional phenomenon as well that can set in, that can be equally as devastating as the passion to actively pursue the battle. So the emotions of people is one of the key forces in warfare. The next is chance, or the uncertainties of the situation. So the war is an inherently uncertain endeavor. So we've seen this with the United States. The United States has far and away the strongest military in the world, and yet in the last since at least Vietnam, smaller, weaker forces have caused the United States to have to withdraw, have caused the United States ongoing military pain and defeats, or at least have been able to essentially draw not a truce. What's the word I'm looking for? The United States has not been able to defeat them. They haven't been able to defeat the United States. A stalemate is what the word I'm looking for. They've been able to draw a stalemate with the United States despite being much, much weaker than the United States. We saw this in GWAD, the Global War on Terrorism, okay, and many, many battles like that. And so there is an uncertainty that exists in war, that even when somebody might think, oh, clearly we have the decisive advantage in weaponry and personnel and training, et cetera, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that particular force is going to be victorious. And so there's uncertainties about how the enemy is going to react, all kinds of things that make it virtually impossible to go into a war and to go into a battle absolutely sure of victory. And the third one is reason, the rational calculations of leadership. So there are some reasoned aspects of warfare. My favorite example, you've heard this many times on the show. So in World War II, General George Patton, right? He mobile warfare, keep pushing, keep going, don't stop and regroup, but keep the pressure on the enemy. Okay, that is a rational, reasoned leadership decision, or I should say that was a rationed, reasonable leadership position taken by Patton, and its basis was that as long as we're keeping pressure on the enemy has to react rather than plan and attack us. And so we're more likely to gain victory by constant pressure on the enemy, right? So these three forces, passion, chance, and reason, come together to really express the nature of war. And we have a similar dynamic in the business world. So we have the emotional issues of people. Okay. And people can be very dedicated to a business enterprise. They can be dismissive of it. They can be just kind of about a business enterprise. And those can all, so employee motivation can have a big impact on whether a particular business is successful. The same thing is true of customers, right? It's not just the people who work for the business, but people who patronize the business, whether it's a product or a service business. People can be excited about it, and people can be, I don't, I don't care about this. This is nothing to me. So I was in a meeting this morning with the Independent Trustees Alliance, a group of members. We get together every few months to talk about matters related to our profession. And it was interesting to note that there were some members with a passionate interest in our business as independent trustees, in helping other people in our business become better at what we do. So we raise the tide for everyone. And there were others that, they were more content to just sit and listen, and they didn't say anything. They didn't ask questions. So now that at least from appearances standpoint, there's a passionate group and maybe a less passionate group. Now it could also be there was a shy group and a not shy group. Okay. But in any event, the emotions of people in business are a key force in determining the success of the business. Okay. Chance, uncertainty, also, of course, a big factor in business. We don't control the economy. The economy is the sum total of hundreds of millions in the United States and billions of people in the world. And we have to accept that we don't know how the economy is going to respond, especially on a micro level. Okay. Even on a macro level, though, while economists make predictions, and we can say, well, we know supply and demand have a big impact on the way the macroeconomy works, and we know that if you pump a tremendous amount of money into the economy while the amount of products and services that are available to be bought stays relatively the same, we're going to have inflation. So those kinds of things are more certain, but the duration of inflation, the amount of inflation, all of these things are hard to predict. And as much as economists use different models to try and predict these phenomena, they remain an area of uncertainty. And so, excuse me, a new product, we can think, oh, this is the most brilliant thing. People obviously need this. And yet when we release it on the market, nobody's interested. So there is the inherent uncertainty of business. That is another force. And finally, there is reason, strategy in business, just like there is in warfare. And we have planning, we have strategy, we have tactics. All of them can be based on data that we get from our customers, from the data that we get about our employees, about the market, about the economy, right? So we can do some rational planning, okay? And that is also a potent force in the business arena. So somehow where the three intersect, passion, chance, and reason, okay, or emotion, chance, and reason, however we want to express these, those forces come together in a way that determines what happens in our businesses, what happens in the economy in general. Okay, so we need to be mindful of all of these and understand what can we control and what do we not have control over, right? So we can have some influence on the passion of the people involved in our businesses, whether it's our employees, whether it's our customers through influence marketing or advertising or whatever. We can have we have control over our strategy, the reason part of it. Okay, but there's always the chance part of it that we don't have control over, and so we have to deal with that as well. Okay, so that's one idea coming out of Clausewitz. Another is the primacy of strategy and objectives. Okay, so Clausewitz is famous, and you can see it here on the cover of the book. War is not merely a political art, but also a political instrument. Okay, and war is really an extension of politics. Okay, so we tend to think of war as being this thing that happens when maybe nothing else will work, or when people are hopeless. That's not necessarily the case. If you go back to World War II, for example, Japan deciding to go to war with the United States was a calculated strategy that was part of its overall political strategy to gain dominance in the Western Pacific and to relieve itself from the imposition of embargoes and such that were restraining its power. And the idea, Japan's fundamental strategy, and I talked about this, I believe it was last week, when I talked about the Pearl Harbor debacle. Imperial Japan's idea was to attack to launch a surprise attack on the United States in an effort to push the United States back on her heels and essentially get her to negotiate and make compromises and concessions that the Imperial Japan wanted in order to continue to build its Asian co-prosperity project that it had been working on for a good almost 10 years at that point, I believe it was. So this idea of war as an extension of politics, that is one of the central Clausewitzian ideas. So so then when we talk about business, and we talk about business strategy, and we talk about business tactics, they all need to be in service of the clear objectives of the business. Okay, so for example, you may have a goal, an objective to double sales in your business in next year in 2025. Okay, that's a laudable goal, but how does that relate to the fundamental objective of your business? Okay, so let's take an example of a healthcare company. Okay, why are you engaged in providing healthcare? Is it because you want to make a lot of money? Okay, is it because you want to improve the health of your clients or customers? What is your fundamental objective? What we might call your mission. Okay, and this is not as easy to figure out as it seems. And there was a time, you don't see it as much now, but when every business was saying, well, we have to have a mission statement. The problem with a lot of those mission statements were that they described a bunch of goals, but they didn't get down to the nitty-gritty, one sentence summary of why the business existed beyond the economic idea of the business. And here's the thing: economics in business serves the idea, not vice versa. You look at any successful business and you will see it's the idea being served, and that led to the economic success, not the other way around. Whether it's Coca-Cola and providing this delicious, refreshing beverage that gave people a pick-me-up, and so and became so popular that it also became enormously financially successful, whether it's a company like SpaceX, where the core idea was to create reusable vehicles that could make access to space and other planets, the moon, much more accessible, and could democratize space travel, and SpaceX now too has become financially successful. It's the idea that drove the financial success, not the other way around. Okay, and so when we look at business strategy and the creation of objectives, they need to be in service of that core mission, that idea that is the, to use the French term, raison d'être, the reason for being of that business. If the only reason for a business to exist is to make money, that business is probably not going to be successful, or at least as successful as it could have been if it had a mission that could really ignite the passion of the owners and the people working for that company. Okay. Next is the fog of war. If you remember any of the shows I did on Marine Corps warfighting doctrine, I talked about the fog of war. So no matter what you do during a war, their information will always be incomplete. There will be uncertainty. Some information will be misleading. It may be the enemy purposely putting out information that's wrong in order to trick the other side into thinking that something's going on that is not. Okay. Again, famous example from World War II, the D-Day landings in Normandy, right? There was a whole shadow army made up around George Patton that the information about it was allowed to get to the Nazi high command that Patton was going to be attacking at the Pas de Calais. Why did the Allies do that? Because by putting out that misleading information, when the Allies actually attacked at Normandy, that kept Adolf Hitler from moving the forces he had guarding the Pas de Calais to oppose the Normandy landings. And so it made it easier for the Allies to be victorious at Normandy, right? So information is incomplete, it's misleading, and this creates uncertainty, i.e. this idea of fog. We're never operating in a completely clear environment. We cannot. Okay. Now, what does that mean for the business side of things? Well, number one, we're never going to have complete information. And if we're going to delay decisions until we have so-called complete information, we're never going to be able to make a decision. So we have to get comfortable with the idea that decisions have to be made based on the information that is available, and with an understanding that even the information available may turn out to not be accurate or correct information. Okay. Now, obviously, the larger the stakes of a decision, the more time and resources we're going to invest in accumulating or in getting information, in getting intelligence. Okay. But the reality is, even for a decision that could mean the survival of the business, we're not going to get perfect information. We're not going to get, if we have so much information that we're absolutely sure that what we're doing is correct, we're probably fooling ourselves. Okay, because that goes back to the Trinity. There's always that chance factor involved, the uncertainty of war and business. And so we have to get comfortable with the fog of war. And we also have to get comfortable then with having made a decision, continuing to monitor how the execution of that decision is going, so that if we need to, we can pull back on that decision, make another decision, or not necessarily pull back, but move on, but take a different, a slightly different route. We make adjustments to the decision, so that in real time, based on feedback that we're getting for the decision made, maybe as we pursue a decision, we'll get some feedback that will help clear some of the fog, right? And so we need to adjust things a little bit, tweak them, or maybe make larger adjustments in order that we raise the likelihood that we'll be ultimately successful. Okay. And so that's the reality of dealing in the fog of war and in the fog of business. Okay. Next is this idea of center of gravity. So Clausewitz talks about focusing on an opponent's center of gravity, either their key strength or their critical vulnerability, right? So their key strength may be in the form of, let's say it's a navy. This is I think an easy example to see. So let's say the key strength of a navy, certainly in the United States Navy, a key strength would be an aircraft carrier, because these days an aircraft carrier not only protects itself, it protects all the other ships in the strike group that are with it, right? So that's a key strength, but it's also a critical vulnerability, because if the enemy could sink that aircraft carrier, now they've rendered all the other ships that are with it much more vulnerable. And that is an interesting dynamic for us to realize, is our key strength can also become, or can also be a critical vulnerability if that strength is somehow destroyed, right? And so that's what you see in the Navy today. And there's a debate in the United States Navy whether we should even continue to have aircraft carriers. There's such huge platforms, they cost so much money, they have so many people on them. Are they really a key strength anymore, or are they really a critical vulnerability? You see the same debate going on with respect to manned aviation. So there are many. I was reading an article about this, I think it was yesterday or the day before. Among others, Elon Musk is saying that we shouldn't have manned aircraft anymore, because that is a critical vulnerability that we don't need to have, because we can use unmanned aerial vehicles to do everything that manned aircraft can do. Now, that may or may not be the case. I'm not going to debate that issue today. Only to show this idea that one of the key strengths of the United States Navy, for example, is our naval aviators. They are probably the best in the world. I know people in the Air Force think that they're better pilots, but the fact of the matter is the ability to land on an aircraft carrier in the middle of the water is a skill that most, if none of Air Force aviators could do without the special kind of training that naval aviators have. Okay, so you have a key strength there, and yet at the same time, it's also a critical vulnerability. So how is the Navy going to deal with that going forward? That issue of the center of gravity that is the Navy. So in a business too, we have key or core strengths, but we also have weaknesses. We have them in our businesses, and we need to understand them in our competitors. Okay, just like in warfare, we need to understand our own key strengths and critical vulnerabilities and those of the enemy. We need to do the same thing in our businesses. So to go back to the example of Coca-Cola. So one of its key strengths is its enormous brand awareness. There is virtually no place on earth that hasn't heard of Coca-Cola, and for whom the Coca-Cola logo does not resonate. That is a key strength. However, Coca-Cola also has a key vulnerability in that it is one of the least healthy things that we can consume. It's basically drinking sugar, right? And so, in limited amounts, presumably it's okay, but the amount of Coca-Cola that a lot of people drink, especially here in the United States, is definitely a critical vulnerability, right? And you can see lots of health advocates who, if they had their way, they would outlaw soda pop, not just Coca-Cola, of course, but all soda pop, Pepsi, Mountain Dew, all that stuff, right? There are schools that don't permit children to drink soda pop. They've gotten rid of what do you call them, vending machines with soda in them and that sort of thing, right? So when we look in business when we look at our businesses, we need to examine them with an eye to what are our key strengths and what are our critical vulnerabilities. And if we have a key strength, is that key strength also a critical vulnerability that if it were attacked, I put that in quotes because business is not a kinetic activity like warfare where we're going to, well, God forbid. I mean, we saw the murder of the United Health CEO. God forbid that business does become that kind of kinetic activity. But where may our core strengths also be critical vulnerabilities because they're subject to being undermined by a competitor? Okay, and this is so you see this. Well, I haven't seen these commercials for a while, but I used to see. I'm trying to think of I think it was a water company, and they were attacking soda pop as being sugary, horrible stuff for you, and you should drink water instead, right? And they've had a lot of success with that, by the way. I know for my daughter, she will not drink soda pop. She will only drink water. Okay, obviously a healthier choice for her. But our competitors will try to take advantage of our critical vulnerabilities. So I'll use my profession as an example. So the key strength of being an independent trustee or a private trustee is, for example, we'll go to the home of a beneficiary, or we'll go to the home of a grantor, sit down with them, talk with them, see what's there. We'll go to the home of a decedent and deal with the personal property that was left behind. We'll do that ourselves in some cases. Whereas a trust company, which is another organization that provides essentially the same services as an independent trustee, they're not going to do those kind of things. Okay, they're not set up to do it. It's just out of their ken. So a key strength of a private trustee or an independent trustee is we can provide much more personalized, on the scene service than a trust company does. Okay, so that's our core strength. One of our core vulnerabilities, though, is we typically don't have the kind of financial strength that a trust company has. And because ours is a new profession, many people in the probate and the trust and estate and probate world have never heard of us. And so when they do, they're kind of like, what's that? Why would I want to have an independent trustee? I'd rather have a trust company to handle things. They've been around for 100 years. I know they're going to be around for 100 years more. So that's a critical vulnerability. So in my business, I have to accentuate the strengths that my profession brings to the table while demonstrating that the critical vulnerabilities of my practice are actually not nearly as great as they may be made out to be by, say, trust companies, and that indeed the key or core strengths are really much, much bigger and more important to a client than any critical vulnerability would be. One of the ways that happens here in California is you have to be licensed to pursue my profession. So people look at licensing as a form of credibility building aspect of a profession. Another way that we're doing it is through this organization I mentioned, the Independent Trustee Alliance, where we've come together and professionalized our business, our standing. We created certifications that attest to the knowledge and experience of the people who have those certifications, right? So all of those are designed to address critical vulnerabilities that we have and shift the center of gravity, which is the original topic that I was dealing with, right? So we need to be aware of those things and deal with them as they actually are, not as we hope they might be. Okay, next is the culminating point of victory. So it is the case oftentimes in war that an advance will be so successful that the advancing army will outrun its ability to resupply itself. Okay, and so the logistics aspect of keeping that army supplied fails. Okay, and at that point, what the ability to be aggressive turns, and now the momentum becomes a liability, or at least a vulnerability, right? Because now the army is far advanced, but it can't get food to its soldiers, it can't get ammunition to defend itself against a counterattack, right? And so their armies need to have a sense of where is the culminating point of victory. And we saw this in World War II. So Bernard Montgomery, Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, the most senior British ground commander, he believed in pushing to the point of victory and then consolidating his ground, or even backing off a little bit, consolidating his hold, and then moving forward again. Okay. Whereas Patton believed in continually moving forward, never stop to solidify your hold, always push forward. Now, the genius of Patton wasn't that he had the idea to do that. It was that he had the ability to motivate his staff to be able to handle the logistical problems that would otherwise have arisen by this continual pushing. So Patton's army didn't run out of food, didn't run out of ammunition. Okay, and that's why he was successful with that type of warfare. Bernard Montgomery was not able to do that. That was not a skill that he had. And so he had to stop periodically in order to make sure that his logistics, his supply train kept up with him, and he didn't move to the point where all of a sudden now he was vulnerable to counterattack. Okay, so understanding your own business with regard to the culminating point of victory is important. Some businesses may be like Patton, where they are so well organized, so highly integrated, everybody is so on top of their game, they can always be pushing forward, and they don't have to worry about outstripping their logistics. Others just may not work that way for a variety of reasons. Okay, now if you are a solo shop like me, right? It's hard to constantly be pushing, right? Because for one thing, it gets physically and mentally exhausting after a while. And so then mistakes start happening. And so I think, the size of business, the people involved, the objective of the business, all of these play into understanding what is the culminating point of victory? And I know for myself, I plan to take downtime at the end of each calendar year in order to assess, in order to assess the year that's happened, in order to examine my plans for the year going forward, and also just to rest and build up my strength. Not unlike each day, we need to get some sleep. Each period, business period, we also need to my metaphor that I've used before, sharpen our axes. We need to take some time to do that. So now, if you have a large company where you're able to, maybe you're a manufacturing company where you're able to run multiple shifts so you can always keep production going. You never have to worry about not having enough product to sell. And you have multiple outlets in order through which you can sell your product. And some sell well during times of expansion and others sell well during times of recession. So maybe you can always be pushing forward in the way that General Patton did, okay? But in other cases, if you've got a product that it sells well when the economy is booming, but when things are tough, like they'll take the cannabis industry here in California, or at least here in Los Angeles. So cannabis was selling really well when the economy was great, but as inflation heated up and as wages didn't keep pace, a lot of cannabis retailers, distributors, and cultivators have gone out of business because it turns out that cannabis is more of a luxury item, or at least that's how people treat it, as opposed to a staple, right? So if you're manufacturing food, right, people need to eat no matter what the economic circumstances are. Okay. However, there's a difference between you're providing, fresh fruits and vegetables, and you're providing caviar and champagne, right? Caviar and champagne, when the economy is booming, are doing well. When the economy is not booming, probably not doing as well. Whereas people, generally speaking, eat at least some fruits and vegetables, no matter what the economic conditions are, right? So we need to look at our center of gravity, our key strengths and critical vulnerabilities, and those will help guide us to understanding what is the culminating point of victory for our particular business. Okay, and I'm gonna talk about one more. Excuse me, and that is that. Well, let's see. Okay, so the nature of competition, and this relates to. So Clausewitz said, war is a dynamic interaction between opposing forces where actions provoke reactions, which in turn provoke other reactions, and it's back and forth, right? War does not happen in a vacuum. Okay, it's two forces or maybe three forces coming together in conflict. And so we can have the best plan in the world, but we can't necessarily predict how the enemy is going to react to our attack. And so while we may think they're going to respond one way and plan for that, if they respond a different way, we need either to have alternate response plans depending on how the enemy reacts, or we need to very quickly be able to change our response in order to deal with our enemy's reaction as it's actually happening. One of those two things, and really probably both, because no matter how many contingency plans we have, we may not have the one that exactly matches how the enemy reacts to our attack. Or if maybe we didn't initiate the attack, maybe we were the counterattackers. Okay, but the enemy is, if the enemy attacks us and we counterattack, that's not the end of it, right? there's going to be a counterattack to our counterattack. And so we've got to be anticipating what those will be, have multiple response plans, and in the end, we also need to be flexible enough that we can tweak, if not make larger changes to our response to how the enemy comes back at us in order to be successful. So the same is true in business. And that is, in business, rarely, if ever, are we the sole supplier of a product or service. There's almost always competitors. Now, one of the difficult things is we may be the only company supplying a particular product, let's say, and we may think, okay, we've got a captive market. We have essentially a monopoly because we're the only ones providing this. However, we may be misreading the industry that we're in. Okay, I've talked about this example before. So the railroad industry thought that they were in the business of moving goods by rail. Okay, unfortunately for the railroad industry, they didn't realize that wasn't their business. Their business was transporting more broadly people and goods. Okay, and by not understanding that, trains, in terms of passenger trains, lost out to buses and airplanes. Okay, and for a while they started losing out to trucks in terms of transportation of goods. Okay, now railroads have this. Well, I mean, passenger railroads, for all intents and purposes, doesn't really exist as a business in the United States. There's Amtrak, but Amtrak has not made money except for on certain, certain very specific routes. Amtrak has lost money for decades and decades, right? So there's no real viable passenger rail business in the United States anymore. However, the freight rail business has rebounded from its low point and has become a profitable business. And that's because it has recognized it's in the goods transportation business, not the moving stuff by rails business. And so it's integrated with trucking, with air, et cetera. And indeed, when this has all become a very complex system in the United States. Okay, and so when we talk about the dynamics between opposing forces, we have to be aware that even though we may think there is no opposing force, we may need to pull back our lens and say, wait a minute, indeed, there are opposing forces. It's just we've misread the market in which we're operating. Okay, and so we need to keep a very close and continuous eye on the nature of competition to make sure that we don't lose out to our rivals. So I was talking with I don't remember who it was, sometime in the last few weeks, about the crypto industry. So when people hear crypto these days, I think they're generally thinking about cryptocurrencies. And so crypto is, it's, things like Bitcoin and Dogecoin and those kind of things. And certainly that remains a part of crypto. But where crypto evidently is really having an impact on business is in the movement of money. Okay, so whereas in the conventional banking system, if I put in an order to move money, let's say on a Friday afternoon, okay, those funds probably won't move until Monday. And so, in fact, if I need funds to get somewhere by Saturday and it's Friday, it may actually be faster for me. Or I mean, I can move the money more quickly by going to the bank, pulling those funds out of the bank, getting on an airplane, flying where I need to go, and delivering the funds to where they need to go. That will be faster than the conventional bank money transfer service, the way it works right now. Crypto has no such limitations. So crypto can be sent 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, holidays included. And it's in the nature of the blockchain technology that undergirds crypto that allows it to be moved around. And so the crypto industry is morphing into a payments industry where people can convert, let's say, dollars into what's called a stable coin, where one coin is worth $1. Those stable coins then can be transferred 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, where on the other end, the recipient can transfer them back into dollars from the stable coin. And so if you've been hearing in the news recently, different discussions about how the crypto industry supported President Trump in the recent presidential election, it has, from what I've been learning about the industry, it has much more to do with this broader view of the crypto industry than it has to do with various cryptocurrencies. Okay, and so this is why the crypto companies are so interested in what's going to be happening to them from a regulatory standpoint, because they're actually in the business of moving money, which is in direct competition with the banking system. Okay, now I don't know if banks have cottoned on to this yet, but if they haven't, they need to beware, because banks are not, they don't have a monopoly anymore over moving money. More and more so, people are looking for alternative ways of moving funds that are more aligned with their lives and their businesses. Okay, so all of these. So the nature of competition, we really need to understand that in a much more complex way than we might think. And again, Clausewitz can help us with that. So I went over, I think, about 8 ideas from On War by General Carl von Clausewitz. I encourage you to get the book and read the book. I will put a link to the book on Amazon. It will be an affiliate link. So if you click through on the link and buy the book, I think I get like 2 or 3 cents or something like that. But again, it's one of the 2 most iconic books on military strategy, and so many of the ideas have a one-to-one correlation with how we run our businesses and professions. I think you will find a very rich mine there from which to get ideas that will help you in your professional lives. So I thank you very much for joining me today, especially those of you joining me live. I always get a kick out of watching my little ticker here and on how many people are watching me as I go. And I know there's usually one friend of mine, Leman, from Africa, who watches. So I just want to say hi to you, and thank you for tuning in. And tomorrow at 10 a.m. Pacific time is my show, People Making Money. I had to think about it for a second. And I'm going to be talking about a subject that I think has really should be top of mind to anyone who is looking to achieve and maintain business and professional success, and that is continuous skills and knowledge improvement. So the reality is that we live in a dynamic business environment, and technology is changing, ways of doing things are changing, how people look at different aspects of their lives are changing. And we have to keep up with these changes in order to keep our businesses not just viable, but strong. So we need to have a plan of continuous, I should say, education, continuous building of skills, so that we can be prepared to make those, to make the right strategic and tactical and operational decisions. And hopefully you will include business lessons from the military in that. See, shameless plug for my show in that. But this is one of the ways that we can come together to figure out, what do we need to be doing, what do we need to be thinking about, what skills do we need to be working on in order to maintain momentum in our professional lives. So that's, again, Wednesday at 10 a.m. And then next week, Monday at 10 a.m. Pacific time, is my show, Trust and Estates Weekly. It is exactly what it says. And then a week from today, I'll be back with the next edition of Business Lessons from the Military. So again, thank you so much for joining me today. Wishing you a wonderful rest of the day. And signing off as I always do, Marie, darling, you are my bell. Courage